Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Constantine, Part 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in the north of England, where a man named John Constantine is voluntarily undergoing electroconvulsive therapy at Ravenscar Psychiatric Hospital. Although he doesn't actually have a mental illness, he allows the doctors to proceed. During a therapy session, the doctor begins a conversation with him, and from their exchange we learn that John once exorcised a demon from a 9-year-old girl named Astra, but tragically he failed, and the girl died. The doctor believes John's guilt has led him to imagine the murderer as a demon, but John insists that it was a demon, and her death is not the real issue. What torments him is that she was dragged into hell because of him, a burden he cannot forgive himself for. The doctor, of course, dismisses his smelly bullshit, and John remains in the hospital. That is until one day, he notices an unsettling swarm of cockroaches, as though leading him somewhere. Following their lead, John arrives at a room where he finds walls crawling with cockroaches. A woman is there, painting something on the wall. He cautiously approaches, confused by what she's doing. At first, he assumes she's practicing black magic and tells her to stop. However, when he looks into her eyes, he realizes she is possessed. John is reluctant to intervene, but his conscience won't let him turn away. He begins the exorcism. After a series of chants and rituals, the woman regains consciousness, completely unaware of what happened. John reassures her that everything is fine and that the red on the wall is just paint. As the swarm of insects disperses, a chilling message is revealed on the wall saying Liv must die. Realizing this threat is directed at him, John decides it's time to leave. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the woman named Liv is finishing her shift at work and getting ready to drive home. While reversing her car, the parking sensor alerts her to an obstacle. Frustrated, she steps out to check, but sees nothing. Suddenly, the car engine roars to life, startling her to the ground. Just as abruptly, the car shuts off again. Baffled, Liv gets back inside, only to find the car won't start. She steps out once more, and the streetlights around her flicker and go dark. Left with no choice, she abandons the car and begins to walk. But before she can get far, the ground beneath her starts to crack open. Shocked, she scrambles to avoid falling into the growing chasm. A car nearby is swallowed into the pit, and moments later, a blast of sparks and flames erupts as underground power cables ignite. Terrified, Liv screams in a chicken voice and runs for her shitty life. A taxi suddenly pulls up, blocking her path. John steps out and asks if she's okay. Still on edge, Liv defensively brandishes pepper spray, stopping his hormone flow. John introduces himself and warns her that something strange is happening. Naturally, Liv doesn't believe him, assuming he's just some weirdo who only wants to have a baby with her. Resigned, John hands her his business card and tells her to call him if she needs help. Skeptical, she reads the title aloud, saying he is a master of dark magic. John awkwardly admits the title is exaggerated, adding that he's working on a new business card design. He then heads toward the sinkhole. Descending into the pit, John begins investigating what caused it. Strange noises emerge from the shadows, and John warns whatever's hiding in the dark it would be wise to stay away from him, or else. Dust swirls as the air thickens, and when the smoke clears, an angel appears. Unfazed, John engages the angel in conversation. The angel introduces himself as Manny and explains that he has been assigned to watch over John. John brushes him off, claiming he doesn't need a guardian and that he's doing just fine. Manny reminds him of Astra's fate, warning that John himself will face the same hell if he doesn't change his ways. Unmoved, John dismisses Manny's concern, refusing his help. Before departing, Manny delivers a cryptic message. The world isn't what it used to be, and something big is coming. John presses him for details, but before he can answer, the sound of approaching police sirens interrupts. Manny vanishes in a gust of wind, leaving John to ponder his words. Elsewhere, Liv hitches a ride home with her neighbor. When she arrives at her apartment and unlocks the door, she notices someone approaching her from down the hallway. Panicked, she rushes inside and bolts the door shut. Outside, the figure pulls out a knife, clearly intending harm. After entering her apartment, Liv took off her coat and began snacking on some biscuits. She noticed a fortune slip inside the packet that told her to trust him. Meanwhile, something strange was approaching from the hallway outside, stopping just outside her door. At this moment, a totem appeared on her door and lit up as the presence drew closer. Seeing this, the entity retreated and instead moved toward the neighbor girl's door, slipping inside. The girl was using her computer when suddenly the light behind her exploded. Startled, she turned to look. Not long after, Liv was awakened by loud noises. She opened her door to check and saw a group of police officers in the hallway, warning her to return inside. Concerned for her neighbor, Liv moved closer, only to see that the girl was already dead, with visible wounds on her neck. Shocked, Liv staggered back, and as she turned around, her eyes fell on the glowing totem on her door, bringing John's words rushing back to her mind. On the way back from transporting the body, the coroner's vehicle suddenly shook, and the driver heard strange noises from the back. Curious, he stopped the vehicle and opened the rear door to investigate. Everything seemed normal at first, but as he hesitated, the corpse abruptly moved. Thinking it was a case of mistaken death, the driver rushed to help untie the body. At that moment, the lights went out, a piercing scream echoed, and the vehicle shook violently, another victim claimed. The next day, Liv confronted John, telling him about her neighbor's death and her suspicion that it was caused by whoever carved the symbols on her door. John summoned an old friend of his named Chaz, who admitted to carving the protective totem. John explained that Liv needed to be taken somewhere safe to prevent further deaths. Confused, Liv asked why someone was trying to kill her since she hadn't done anything to anyone. John explained it's because of her father who asked him to protect her. Liv, even more confused, replied her father died before she was born. As she started to walk away, John added, whoever told her that lied since her father died last year. Liv stopped in her tracks. John handed her an object saying this belonged to her father and now it's hers. As Liv moved closer to take it, a car suddenly crashed into the building, narrowly missing them. John quickly shouted for Chaz to help, but Liv realized the car had smashed into her workstation. She murmured if she had gone back, she would be dead like a piece of shit. John remarked grimly that something evil was still after her. It wouldn't stop until she was gone. Walking over to the car, he examined the driver, who emitted a chilling, pig-like squeal. Liv, horrified, saw the driver and gasped. It was her neighbor. She exclaimed that the neighbor was dead last night, but how is this possible? John calmly stated that what she saw now was possession. This was unusual. They didn't usually act like this during the day. John approached the possessed figure and demanded to know who he was and who sent him here. The entity gave no response and disappeared silently. When John turned back, Liv was gone. Chaz was confused, saying he didn't see where she went. Overwhelmed, Liv fled the ruined office and sought out her mother, asking when her dad actually died. She also showed her the item John had given her, asking if she had ever seen this before. Before her mother could respond, Liv froze. She was seeing a vision, her deceased grandmother brushing her mother's hair. Startled, her mother asked what was wrong. But before Liv finished what wanted to say, her grandmother's form changed grotesquely, terrifying Liv. Unable to continue the conversation, she bolted out of the house. Not long after, Liv found John again and demanded answers. John replied she was awakening. Soon, she would be able to see the real world, just like her father did. Liv, struggling to understand, followed John as he walked a few steps ahead, stopping suddenly. He turned and asked where her father's pendant was. Liv handed it over, and John grasped her hand. The world around them suddenly shifted colors, darkening dramatically. John instructed her to look around. Liv stared in awe. The sky churned with black clouds, dark shadows flew through the air, and in the distance, figures in medieval attire wandered aimlessly. Liv was horrified, and John explained they were wandering souls. They're trapped, with nowhere to go. Liv hesitated, asking if John could see them. John shook his head and demanded to know what else she could see. Liv glanced behind him, her eyes widening. A train was speeding toward them. Panicked, she tried to pull away, but John wouldn't let go, ignoring her pleas. As the train thundered closer, Liv screamed, unable to break free. At the last moment, the train collided, but instead of impact, it dissolved into black smoke. John released her hand and the world returned to normal. Seeing Liv's bewildered expression, John chuckled. He explained that what Liv saw was a ghost train. She could see it because of her natural gift, enhanced by her father's pendant. Over time, she would get better at this. Their world overlaps with other realms, coexisting in parallel. After these experiences, Liv was beginning to believe him. In the car, Liv waited until John dozed off and then tried to ask Chaz about how her father had died. Chaz simply replied her father died a hero. Liv wanted to know more, but John interrupted, saying it had nothing to do with what's happening now. Once they dealt with the demon chasing her, they were done here. He then told Chaz to turn off the music. Chaz twisted the knob, but the radio remained unresponsive. Outside, the traffic lights began flashing erratically. John urgently warned Chaz to pay attention, but it was too late. A large truck slammed into them. A moment later, Liv's screams woke John. He climbed out of the wreckage only to see live power lines sparking and writhing toward the car like serpents. Recognizing the demon's presence, John quickly cast a spell to hold it back. Chaz managed to escape first, but John stayed to keep the demon at bay. He swiftly pulled Liv's heavy body out of the wreckage and helped her climb over the car. Just as John paused the incantation, he spun around and yelled for Chaz to be careful. In the blink of an eye, a power line pierced Chaz. Liv screamed in horror, but John pulled her heavy body away, calmly stating they needed to figure out what kind of demon is after her. Liv, distraught, exclaimed that Chaz just died. How can he act like this doesn't bother him? John dismissed her concerns, saying sometimes what she saw isn't the whole truth. Confused and frustrated, Liv followed John to the next topic. John led her to an old mill, explaining that this had been her father's place, which now rightfully belonged to her. They entered to find a surprisingly large space, covered in dust and cobwebs. Liv was amazed by its scale. John explained her father often came here to perform divinations and secretly kept watch over her. He picked up a book as Liv curiously reached for an old helmet. John warned her to be careful since that's not a sex toy. Reluctantly, Liv put it down and John returned to flipping through the book. Liv's attention shifted to a map on the wall. She asked why the markings on this map looked different from reality. John explained her father created this map to record the otherworldly realms he could see. Liv asked if she could also see the other world like her father. John replied she could with her pendant and this map. He then discovered an entry about the powerful demon whose name is Furcifer. Looks like the angel was right. Liv began fiddling with her pendant on the map, while John continued reading that Furcifer could control lightning and storms, which explains its ability to manipulate bodies and electrical circuits. Suddenly, Liv yelped. Her hand was bleeding. John told her to let the blood drip onto the map. As the droplets hit the surface, the map came to life, with the blood moving across it like a compass. Liv nervously asked where it was going. John answered to where the trouble was. The blood stopped at Edgewood Street. She followed up, asking what they should do about it. John emphasized their priority was keeping her alive, and she would need to act as bait. Not long after, John encountered the angel Manny again. Frustrated, John complained about being pressed for time. Manny used his powers to momentarily freeze the storm, pausing the raindrops mid-air. John studied them briefly before Manny let the rain fall, smirking as he denied John any chance to experiment further. Moving to the main topic, Manny warned that Furcifer was a formidable demon, one that wouldn't normally venture into the human realm unless something serious was going on. John asked if Manny wanted him to investigate for him. He was destined for hell anyway, so why bother? Manny cryptically hinted that there might still be hope for John. Just as John tried to press him for answers, Manny disappeared. The rain resumed, and an old gatekeeper asked John if he was all right. Drenched, John replied not even close, letting the rain soak him as he stood in silence. Not long after, John sought out his old friend Richie. The moment Richie saw him, he backed away in fear, shouting for John to leave. John ignored the reaction and asked how the research was going. Richie, clearly uneasy, wanted to leave, but John's mention of a heavenly messenger warning of impending trouble eased the tension. They began to talk. Richie, a theology professor and a top-tier hacker, had been deeply scarred by the Astra incident. John urged him to help, warning that things were about to get much worse. Back at the mill, Liv sat by the fireplace for warmth. As she stood still, a figure suddenly appeared in the mirror, startling her to wet herself. She turned to her side but saw nothing, and no further strange events occurred. She relaxed just as John returned, carrying food. Liv asked about the man in the mirror, and John explained that mirror recorded fragments of chaotic timelines. Sometimes she catched glimpses of other moments. The man she saw was probably her father, and this place had a lot of strange phenomena like that. As they spoke, Chaz suddenly appeared, scaring Liv again. She stammered, wondering how he was alive. John replied that's why he was one of his oldest friends, because he had special survival tricks. Liv couldn't imagine what those might be, but John changed the topic, urging Chaz to prepare food. Liv asked if they'd be confronting the demon tonight. John smiled, saying living in the moment was his motto. Later, John and Liv arrived at a tall building and bribed the guard to get access to the rooftop. John began setting up a ritual circle. Liv asked what it was for. John explained that it was designed to trap the demon and send it back to hell. He added the design was his own creation, combining various runes and totems. With the ritual complete, John warned Liv to stand inside the circle and not move. As they waited, Liv asked about John's past. He didn't hold back, saying his mother died giving birth to him, and his father blamed him for it and was abusive. Liv hesitated before asking if he ever thought about his mom. John replied yes, saying that's why he taught himself theology, hoping to summon his mother. But from his teens until now, he had never succeeded, and he didn't know why. Moments later, the security guard appeared on the rooftop. Liv told him he shouldn't be up here. The guard didn't respond, and John realized something was off. He muttered that the demon was here. John began luring Furcifer into the circle. The demon hesitated at the edge, but ultimately stepped in. John wasted no time and activated the ritual. The guard's body began to smoke and writhe in pain, while Liv watched, frozen in fear. Believing the demon had been caught, John paused his incantation. But Furcifer stood back up, its form shifting into John's likeness. Smirking, it taunted him by saying that he lacked faith, and how it felt to see his future self. John, slightly shaken, quipped that it was not as handsome as the present. Furcifer continued, saying, "It's only a matter of time before he joins them. Tonight, it's her turn." It turned its gaze to Liv, snapping power lines and attempting its old trick, though this time it didn't kill her. Instead, it restrained her. It sneered, beginning to summon a storm. John rummaged through his bag as the sky darkened, thunder roared, and lightning illuminated the scene. Furcifer declared that in this storm, he was God. John pulled out a flare gun and shot it into the sky. Richie, waiting in a car below, saw the signal and began working his magic. As he hit a button, the entire city's power grid went dark. Furcifer demanded to know what's happening, but John lit his lighter and tossed it onto the ritual circle, igniting it. Flames erupted, trapping Furcifer within. Liv seized the moment to free herself and escape the circle, but Furcifer remained unfazed, casting another spell. This time, it conjured Astra's spirit as a bargaining chip, threatening John to let it go. Seeing Astra, John froze, dismayed. He hadn't expected Furcifer to be capable of such a move. Torn, he turned to Liv and whispered he was sorry. Liv was confused, unsure of his intent. John resumed the incantation, but Liv, holding her pendant, realized that Astra wasn't real. She quickly interrupted him, shouting the truth. Trusting Liv's instincts, John's fury surged. He roared that he could save Astra, and Furcifer could never manipulate him again. With that, he unleashed the final spell to send the demon back to hell. The circle roared to life, and the false Astra attempted to plead for some hormone mercy, but John was unmoved. The ritual reached its peak, and a column of fire shot skyward, consuming Furcifer and the fake Astra as they were dragged into hell. After it was all over, John collapsed onto the ground. Liv wanted to console him, but John told her to head downstairs, saying someone would take her away and he just needed to be alone for a bit. Shortly after, Liv got into Richie's car and began asking about Astra. Richie explained that Astra was actually the daughter of one of John's friends. She was once possessed by a demon, and they turned to John for help. John's solution was to summon an even stronger demon, a Babylonian god-turned demon, to drive out the current one. But things went terribly wrong. The Babylonian demon broke free from John's control, abducted Astra, and dragged her into hell. As they talked, the car passed through Edgewood Street. Liv suddenly yelled for Richie to stop. She got out and walked toward a scene where numerous police cars had gathered. A young boy lay dead on the ground, his grieving mother wailing in despair. Liv's earlier divination had come true, and she stood there in shock, staring at the tragic scene. Later, in a bar, Chaz found John and informed him that Liv had left, likely for California, and she left the pendant behind. He then asked if she was safe. John assured him that with Furcifer sent back to hell, he had cast an invisibility spell to keep her protected. Chaz nodded and then pulled out a map, saying before she left, Liv used her divination one last time. This map was covered with her markings, spanning all of America. She hoped John would keep fighting. Chaz's words carried a tone that reminded John of Liv's father. After Chaz left, Manny appeared again. The angel exposed John's tactics, accusing him of deliberately teaching Liv divination and orchestrating the tragedy she saw to scare her away. John admitted that he preferred working alone anyway. Manny reminded him things weren't the same anymore. Her abilities could be a tremendous help to him, and he shouldn't have pushed her away. John countered, their war shouldn't involve others. He showed her the harsh reality, and the choice was hers to make. Manny smirked that his chosen words, their war, suggests he seemed to have made up his mind to stand with them. In a dimly lit passage, John pulled out his lighter and smeared kerosene on his hands, preparing for what was to come. Moments later, a group of men rushed toward him. Ready for them, John ignited his hands, flames roaring up. The scene froze suddenly, transforming into a painting held by a mysterious woman. Whether this was her vision or imagination remained unclear. The scene shifts to a mining boss returning home, and his wife greeted him with a nervous expression. As they spoke, she asked hesitantly if he was still hearing that sound. The man scoffed at her for worrying over nothing, saying, "It's just those fools making things up." His wife said no more and suggested he shower before dinner. The mining boss entered the bathroom, adjusted the water temperature, and began his shower. What he didn't expect was that the water would turn into oil. Eyes closed, he didn't notice at first, but then he sensed something was wrong. He turned off the faucet and stared at the shower head in confusion. Before he could react further, flames erupted from the nozzle, and he was burned alive. Back at the mill, John and Chaz discussed recent events. Liv had left a divination mark on Hydewich Township, Pennsylvania, indicating a bloodbath there. Local reports said a mine owner had been burned to death in his home. Chaz expressed regret, explaining he couldn't go with John because he still had a warrant in Pennsylvania from their last visit. Meanwhile, the unidentified woman continued sketching a scene of John. The artwork matched the current events precisely, including the funeral they were witnessing. She quickly completed the details and wondered aloud who this man was, and she couldn't stand it anymore. She tore up the drawing, grabbed a bag, and left her house. The room she left behind was filled with other drawings, all featuring demons and John. Outside, John walked toward the coffin, lost in thought, and accidentally bumped into the woman. Her sketch fell to the ground, and both of them simultaneously said sorry as they bent to pick it up. The woman froze when she realized John was the subject of her drawing. Speechless, she stared at him in shock. John, noticing her gaze, remarked that she was making him uncomfortable. The woman stammered, saying he was the man from her wet dreams and she wasn't sure he was real. John glanced at the drawing she was holding as it unfolded in her hands. She asked who he was. John didn't answer, dismissing her as just a quick sketch artist spying on his muscles. The woman didn't seem angry. Instead, she eagerly pressed him for his name. John, wary of her eccentric behavior, refused to share it. Instead, he grabbed a pencil, punctured the eyes of the figure in the drawing, and said these were the eyes she should have, eyes that see in sunlight, where she always find her answers. The woman stared at the altered drawing, dazed. By the time she snapped out of it, John had disappeared. However, she wasn't foolish. She had managed to snag his wallet during their encounter. Pulling it out, she examined the ID that revealed John's name. She couldn't help but smile. In a bar, John was gathering information. He soon heard from someone that before the mining boss's death, 9 others had died in accidents at his mine. It was said that strange knocking sounds could often be heard coming from the mine, and rumors claimed they had dug too deep, opening the gates of hell. Not long after, John entered the mining boss's mine. On the workbench, he found a helmet and a pickaxe, and decided to venture deeper to investigate. As soon as he stepped inside, he felt the ground move as if something was following him. He stopped at one point, placed his ear against the rock, and struck the stone with the pickaxe. Almost immediately, loud knocking sounds echoed back, much louder than he had expected. Despite being mentally prepared, John couldn't help but jump in surprise. Then the entire mine began to shake violently, as if on the verge of collapse. John quickly turned and retraced his steps to escape. Once he made it out, he followed a group of people into the mining boss's house, sneaking into a family-only area while everyone else was distracted. The faint smell of burning led him to the bathroom. There, he carefully inspected the shower head and immediately sensed something unusual when he touched it. He took out a small vial and collected some of the oily residue. Just as he finished, the mining boss's wife caught him and demanded to know what he was doing. John quickly improvised, claiming he was a reporter conducting an inquiry. His explanation disarmed her suspicion, and they began to talk. It turned out the widow had long harbored resentment toward her husband. Now that he was gone and had left behind a substantial inheritance, she wanted to avoid any complications and dismissed his death as an accident. John tried to gain her trust by making small talk to improve her opinion of him. However, he wasn't prepared for how eager she was for his shining muscles. Taken aback, John quickly excused himself, leaving the widow embarrassed and angry. Hormone frustrated, she began questioning his identity. Realizing the situation was escalating, John decided it was time to make a hasty exit. As John was about to leave, a guy stopped him and demanded to know what's his purpose here. John repeated his cover as a reporter. The guy, unconvinced, ordered someone to search him. With no other option, John fought back when one of them tried to sucker punch him, but the guy persisted in questioning his identity. Ignoring the question, John deflected, pointing out the strange events in the mine. At this, the guy's expression changed. Trying to maintain control, he barked that he was the CEO of this mining company and warned John to watch his tone. Recognizing the guy's fear of the situation gaining publicity, John softened his approach, saying just enough to let both of them back down gracefully. Back at his hotel, John ran into the mysterious woman from earlier, the one with the paintings. Her name was Zed, and she had tracked him down using his wallet. Zed explained that she wanted to understand why she kept dreaming about him. John brushed her off, but Zed was relentless in trying to convince him to listen. She suddenly grabbed his hand, unintentionally tapping into his emotions. Through her touch, she sensed his deep loneliness, pain, despair, and overwhelming guilt. Shocked, Zed exclaimed she couldn't believe someone could live like this. John, startled, pulled away and masked his reaction with a laugh, asking if she was psychic or just guessing. Zed didn't answer, and John had an idea. Believing in her psychic abilities, he decided to test them. He coaxed her into closing her eyes and guided her into a trance-like state to sense something. Zed focused on the vision, but John stealthily poured some of the oil he had collected onto her hand. In her trance, the oil appeared in the bathroom and fire erupted from it. Zed suddenly felt her palm burning and screamed in pain. Realizing he'd gone too far, John quickly tried to wake her, but she couldn't hear him. He wiped the oil from her hand, and only then did Zed snap out of it. Surprisingly, Zed didn't blame John for what happened. Instead, she calmly asked if that's how the mining boss in town was burned to death. John didn't answer and instead asked what else she saw. Zed mentioned a large cross. Helping her up, John remarked that maybe they could investigate together. Zed nodded obediently in agreement. However, as soon as John left, Zed hesitated and knocked on his door, wanting to ask him something. There was no response. Annoyed, she opened the door and found the window wide open. Frustrated, she called out John's name. Meanwhile, John had already left the hotel and arrived at an abandoned church with a massive cross standing at the entrance. He stepped inside and heard the faint whispers of a demon. Speaking loudly, he demanded the demon to show itself. At that moment, a young couple startled him. They were in the middle of a smelly hormone yoga session. Embarrassed at being caught in a church, they quickly dressed. John was speechless, shaking his head in disbelief. The young man apologized, and John shifted the topic, asking about the church. The man said it's a local legend, something about a tall, faceless figure. John, realizing there was no reason to press further, told them to leave. Once alone, he pulled out a thermos, poured some of his blood into it, and recited an incantation while pouring the mixture over himself. Gradually, a hidden demon was revealed before him. As the liquid drained away, the demon disappeared, leaving John to sigh in relief. The next day, Zed arrived at John's studio and found him lying on the sofa. Annoyed, she woke him up, complaining that he was never around when she needed him, but he always popped up when she didn't. John explained to Zed that the demons in her drawings were real and that being around him would inevitably bring her into their world. He warned if she was unlucky, it could be worse than death. If she could accept that, they would talk about working together. Zed looked at him thoughtfully before responding she was not going anywhere. Just as they locked eyes without a smelly kiss, an alarm sounded. John recognized the sound. It was the same one he'd heard at the mines as a child, only activated in the direst emergencies. The two of them quickly arrived at the mine entrance, where thick smoke was billowing out. John approached one of the workers and asked what had happened. The man explained that while workers were still inside, the mine had collapsed. John pressed further, asking if he heard any knocking. The man hesitated before nodding. John glanced over and spotted some company officials nearby. Without a word, he followed them, leaving Zed momentarily behind. When she looked around again, John was gone with his muscle smell. John had entered a car with one of the company representatives, probing him about the town's history. The man admitted that the town was abandoned 5 years ago, but the mining company brought it back to life when they discovered new deposits. John retorted that the company didn't care about people's lives. They had been mining in places they shouldn't, and now the consequences were severe. The man asked if the knocking would stop. John replied the mine had to be shut down. If it continued, people would keep dying. As the man began to waver, the car doors suddenly locked, and oil began rising from the floor, quickly filling the cabin. John tried to break the window, but before he could, a dark claw emerged from the oil and dragged the terrified man under. Zed arrived just in time to see the chaos and frantically searched for something to pry open the door. John, too, was being pulled into the oil. Zed finally found a crowbar and used all her strength to force the door open. After several attempts, she succeeded. The oil spilled out and John was pushed out with it. John, stubborn as always, said everything was under control. He just had a new idea for a spell and they should go check on the man. Zed peered into the car, but it was clear the man was already lifeless. As they walked away, John reiterated the dangers of working with him, but Zed remained undeterred. Shifting the topic, John explained the ancient mining spirits were a common legend in these records. They knock on the walls to warn of danger. Zed asked if those spirits were trying to help miners. John said yes. They didn't come to the surface and they didn't kill people. What's happening now means something else is interfering. There's a powerful force breaking the rules, making terrible things happen. He thought someone was helping it. Zed suggested they head to a bar where miners frequently gathered, hoping to learn more. John agreed, but quipped that he needed a shower and a change of clothes. Before long, John and Zed arrived at a bar where someone was trying to calm down a group of miners. John was puzzled, wondering why there was no one speaking up. Zed mentioned a former priest whose son had died in a mining accident, a perfect motive for revenge. John added that he had found signs of a demon in the abandoned church yesterday, suggesting a possible connection. John intended to make use of Zed's psychic abilities once more. Turning to someone nearby, he said his girlfriend was feeling unwell and asked if she could sit here. The man didn't object and Zed sat down. Once again, John guided her into a trance. It didn't take long for Zed to see a vision of a camp near a waterfall. John questioned the bar owner and learned the location. The two set out immediately. Before entering the camp, John handed Zed a broom for protection. They made their way to the camp and confronted the former priest. After a tense exchange, it became clear that he wasn't the one summoning demons. Sitting down, John listened as the former priest explained this was all about greed. The ones dying on the surface were all company managers. John asked who was left in charge now. The former priest answered that it's Thad, the company owner. John immediately realized the truth and shouted for Zed to leave with him. Meanwhile, Thad was telling his son to inspect the mine now, and they would resume work tomorrow. His son hesitated, saying it's not a good idea since the mining accident. Thad dismissed the concern, saying if the miners were fine with it, they would move forward. Father and son entered the mine, intending to venture deeper. Suddenly, something stirred behind them. They froze, trying to remain calm, but continued forward. Just as they turned, the disturbance erupted. A figure rose from the ground, quickly taking human form. In an instant, it struck down the sun and seized Thad. John and Zed arrived just in time to witness the scene. John handed Zed her sketchpad and asked her to draw this while he would handle the rest. Using a pickaxe to grab the entity's attention, John respectfully pleaded with it to leave this place. As Zed's drawing activated its power, the entity released Thad and vanished. Zed, confused, asked what just happened. John explained he had awakened its original memory. It was a guardian spirit of the earth. Surveying the area, John noted that Thad's son was still alive, but Thad himself was dead. John glanced at the explosives nearby and said the mine had to be permanently sealed, and he had an idea. Before long, the explosives were set, and the former priest arrived, saying he wanted to witness the moment. John handed him the detonator without a word. The former priest, holding the device, muttered this was for his son. He pressed the button, and a thunderous explosion destroyed the mine. Turning to Zed, John asked to borrow her car, telling her the mining spirits wouldn't be disturbed anymore, but they needed to deal with someone who summoned the spirits. Soon after, John confronted Thad's wife. By now, her murderous intentions were evident as she summoned dark spirits in front of him. Unfazed, John said he would give her one last chance to dismiss them. She asked how he had figured her out. John explained when they first met, she let it slip. She was Romani, and summoning ran in her blood. The woman admitted that she swore to leave that life behind, but recently she had felt her powers growing stronger. So she finally used them to do what she had always wanted, kill her husband Thad. John tried to reason with her, saying the magic was so unstable and dangerous that it would corrupt her into darkness. But the woman was resolute. She ordered the summoned spirits to attack, and John was immediately grabbed. Calmly, he said she summoned the spirits of dead miners, but her dead husband was a miner too. With that, John cast his spell, and Thad himself emerged from the floor, dragging his wife into the void. She screamed in a chicken voice as the vengeful spirit of Thad pulled her sexy body into the rift. And with that, John ended the ordeal. Back at another motel, Zed lay on the bed sketching. John teased her if she was moving in with him now. Zed scolded him for his wet daydreaming. John shrugged and said sticking with him was dangerous. He was used to being on his own. Zed shot back, insisting she didn't care, and now she was sure he was the one she had been waiting for. The scene shifts to a woman entering an abandoned house in Chicago. The eerie setting made her uneasy, but she mustered the courage to pry loose a brick from the wall, revealing a hidden Bible. She opened it, and out fell a vinyl record. Not long after, she brought the record to a friend, warning him not to listen to it but just verify it's authentic. The friend agreed with a smile. As the woman left to make a phone call, the record began to play. Her friend, wearing headphones, heard faint singing and glanced at the woman. Unable to resist, he put on the headphones. As the song continued, something felt off. The headphones grew icy, frost forming on the surface. He screamed in pain and ripped them off, peeling skin from his ears in the process. Unfortunately, the cords snapped, and the song began playing on speakers instead. Overwhelmed, he grabbed a screwdriver and stabbed himself in the head. The woman turned back just in time to witness the horrifying scene. At the mill, John stood covered in red paint, chanting an incomprehensible spell. Zed and Chaz arrived, and Zed asked what they were doing. Chaz explained they were learning spells and wanted to show her around while he finished up. Zed followed Chaz down the stairs. He explained this place belonged to an old friend, and he called it a sanctuary for dark spirits. There are a lot of dangerous things here that can't fall into the wrong hands. Zed looked around, noting how much bigger the interior seemed compared to the exterior. Chaz said he had measured it. Sometimes it's a little bigger, sometimes a lot bigger. Zed was puzzled since that didn't make sense. Chaz opened a door and asked if this looked like it made sense. Zed peered inside, seeing a dark corridor stretching endlessly with countless rooms. Just then, John walked by and reminded Zed not to wander off on her own. After a while, John rejoined them, now cleaned up. The three stood by a table where John explained each blood spot represented a prophecy. Zed brought up the news in Chicago, and John recognized the name of a music producer, saying he would never commit suicide. Turning to Zed, he asked her to try channeling. With one hand on the newspaper and the other on the bloodstain, Zed didn't need John's guidance this time. She found herself in a world filled with jasmine blossoms. Outside the trance, John commented on her unique abilities, but Zed began to feel cold and abruptly pulled herself out. John wanted to check it out himself alone, but Zed stopped him, suggesting they go together. John refused, but since the cab was still broken, he reluctantly agreed. As Zed happily walked off to prepare, Chaz said to John this girl had potential. John replied she latched onto him out of nowhere and asked Chaz to do some digging on her background for him. Shortly after, the two arrived at a morgue in Chicago. John explained to Zed how he had first met the music producer. He once wanted to be a lead vocalist in a band, and the producer recorded their first and only album, but he never thought they'd meet again under these circumstances. Setting personal matters aside, John took out a severed hand and casually explained this was called the Hand of Glory. With the right spell, it can temporarily bring the dead back to life. He handed Zed a bag of blood and asked her to pour it on the ground while he lit the Hand of Glory and began chanting. Zed finished pouring the blood and watched curiously. John completed the spell, but nothing happened at first. As the two exchanged confused glances, the music producer suddenly sat up. To their shock, other corpses in the morgue began to stir as well, writhing on their tables. There was no time to figure it out. He handed the Hand of Glory to Zed and quickly asked the music producer what killed him. Gasping, the man managed to say the record and the voice. John struggled to understand the cryptic clues, but the Hand of Glory began to fade. The producer's final words were, "The moonrise," before he fell silent again. Lowering the producer's body, John solemnly sent him to rest in peace. As they left the morgue, Zed asked what the price was for a spell. John shrugged, saying it would probably cost a few days off his life. Zed frowned, concerned for him. John was at a loss after the producer's cryptic words and decided to head to a library to investigate further. Zed quickly searched on her phone and discovered that Moonrise referred to an old record company. The founder was still alive. Perhaps they could talk to him. Meanwhile, the woman from earlier was hiding the record on a shelf when her daughter walked in and asked what she was doing. She quickly replied, "Nothing," but then asked why she was awake. The little girl said she had a bad dream. The woman picked her up to comfort her, but the girl noticed frost forming on the bookshelf and asked what was that. Elsewhere, John used an enchanted card to create a fake ID, allowing him to find out the location of the founder's hospital room. As they left the reception desk, Zed remarked that it was a neat trick. John corrected her, saying it's not a trick, it's real magic. He explained the card's dark history. It could transform into whatever the user needed, but at a bloody cost. When they entered the founder's room and brought up the record, he immediately recognized what they were talking about. John told him that his friend, the music producer, had listened to it and died. He asked what's going on with that record. The founder began to recount the story. Years ago, he had run a recording studio. A blues singer had come in to record. It said that he made a deal with the devil for his talent. One night, they all left, but the blues singer stayed behind to keep recording. That's when the devil came to collect. The record captured the devil's whispers. After the devil took the blues singer, the record was left behind, imbued with its power. A few days later, when he picked it up, he heard those same whispers, terrifying commands urging him to do awful things, and the record was freezing cold. Zed asked why he didn't destroy it. The founder said he tried, but it couldn't be destroyed. Eventually, he had no choice but to wrap it in a Bible and hide it inside the wall. John pressed further, asking how it reappeared. The founder explained that a few days ago, a private investigator came to him. He said a pop singer was willing to pay a fortune to get that record. After saying this, he grew somber and said he thought his time was up, pointing to the corner of the room where the angel Manny stood watching. He took his last breath as Manny gestured to John to stay quiet and then took the founder with him. In the car, Zed noticed that John recognized the musician. He explained that the music producer once tried to recruit a singer. He might be the same person mentioned by the founder. Zed asked why the devil wanted human souls anyway. John replied, because demons used to be angels. Every soul they take makes them stronger, and it's their way of striking back at God for banishing them. At that moment, the little girl back at the house reached for the record, mumbling to herself she really wanted to listen to it. Meanwhile, John and Zed climbed over a fence and entered a house where they found the singer practicing his music. Without hesitation, John charged toward him, shattering a glass window in the process, and grabbed the singer. He shouted that he had killed the music producer and asked where he got the record. The singer, confused, stammered that he didn't know what John was talking about. Just then, a jasmine-like scent filled the air, and a woman's voice interrupted, saying it wasn't him. She was the one who made the deal with the devil. John recognized her. It was Jasmine, the singer's devoted partner. The singer, puzzled, asked her if she knew these people. The tension grew as John declared he would seek justice for the music producer. Jasmine revealed her motives, saying that years ago the singer was dying of cancer, so she gave her soul to the devil to save his life and help him achieve his dreams. After everything was out in the open, John asked Jasmine to bring out the contract. She retrieved it from a drawer, explaining that she met someone at the hospital who claimed he could save the singer's life. John interrupted to mention this man was actually a soul broker and he targeted people at hospitals. Jasmine continued, saying she wasn't sure if he was real or not, but she signed the contract anyway. After that, everything happened just as he said it would. Taking the contract, John examined it and declared it void. Jasmine explained that the soul broker came back and told her if she gave him the record, he would return her soul, so she did it. John scoffed that contracts didn't allow amendments and the soul broker didn't have that authority. He was clearly up to something. The singer, hearing this, was shocked at what Jasmine had done but couldn't bring himself to blame her. John then asked when the soul broker was coming for the record. Jasmine replied he would come tonight and he already sent her the location. Without hesitation, John took her phone and told her to leave the rest to him. Only he could put an end to this. As he said this, he hugged Jasmine without a kiss and discreetly hid something on her. Later, John went alone to the meeting spot. Meanwhile, Jasmine's daughter had retrieved the record and started playing it. The music filled the house, puzzling the adults downstairs. Jasmine immediately realized it was the record and rushed upstairs, calling for her daughter. By the time they reached her, the little girl had already been affected by the record and had fallen unconscious. At the meeting spot, John confronted the soul broker, demanding to know what kind of game he was playing. The soul broker stuck to his claims, insisting the record could grant her wish. John, unimpressed, believed he didn't have that power. As they argued, laughter echoed from the room. John entered cautiously and found someone he recognized, a man known as Papa Midnight, a voodoo priest who profited from selling faith and running cults. John wasn't fond of him and his disdain was obvious. As John insulted him, Papa Midnight's men appeared and knocked him out from behind. John woke up restrained, lying down with his hands and feet tied. Papa Midnight stood over him and said he didn't care for his moral grandstanding. The record wasn't about money, it's about what it could do for him, and he knew John wanted it too. Papa Midnight revealed he had already sent his men to retrieve the record from the singer. The record was as good as his. As for John, Papa Midnight didn't plan to kill him right away. Instead, he injected John with a drug that suppressed his magic and slit his wrist, explaining he had 4 hours to live if he stayed still. He placed a vial of vitamin K nearby and said this could stop the bleeding. If he managed to free himself and not pass out, it's his. Back at the singer's house, Zed grew worried and called Chaz for help. After hanging up, she talked to Jasmine, who had come downstairs. At that moment, the door burst open and Papa Midnight's men stormed in, guns drawn, demanding the record. Zed feigned ignorance. The men held up John's phone, which he had taken earlier. Realizing the situation, Zed warned them about the record's danger, but one of the men fired a warning shot, scaring Jasmine into revealing where it was. Before Zed could stop her, Jasmine told them it was upstairs. The men retrieved the record and left. In their car, the two men waited for Papa Midnight. One of them, curious, touched the record, commenting on how cold it was. Suddenly, the whispers of the demon began to influence him. He said they needed to listen to this. His partner, annoyed, tried to grab it and put it away, but the first man grabbed his hand in a vice-like grip. Both men fell under the record's spell in an instant. John was approached by a homeless man who tried to steal his clothes and shoes. No matter what John said, the man wouldn't stop. At that moment, the angel Manny appeared, mocking John's current predicament. John begged Manny to release him from his bindings, but Manny said he couldn't do that before disappearing. The homeless man snapped out of his trance, and John cleverly tricked him into untying him. The man pulled out the enchanted card, and it appeared as a platinum credit card. The man cautiously pocketed the card, but then took out a saw, saying he couldn't just use the card while he was still alive. With blood loss making him faint, John tried to reason with him. Just as the saw was about to strike, Zed appeared and scared the man off, even taking his car. Zed scolded John for his recklessness, saying if she hadn't marked Jasmine with a tracking nail, she wouldn't have found him this quickly. This time, John didn't argue. The next day, police were busy dealing with the aftermath. John and Zed arrived at the scene, and John remarked this was caused by the record. Whoever holds it falls under the demon's control. Zed looked at the innocent victims with sorrow. Soon after, Chaz showed up with clothes and an MP3 player. He also mentioned that a preliminary check of government records turned up nothing on Zed. As they spoke, Zed called them over. She introduced a man in white as a survivor of the incident. John tried to ask him how he survived, but the man didn't respond. Zed explained the man was deaf. Using sign language, Zed asked the man what happened. The survivor signed back, revealing that yesterday 2 men brought the record to the club. Once it started playing, everyone went crazy. John concluded that Papa Midnight's men were behind this and theorized they planned to broadcast the record to more people. Meanwhile, Zed noticed something strange. A white tiger appeared in the back of an ambulance. John was puzzled and asked what she was looking at, but Chaz couldn't see the tiger either. Instead, he spotted a poster advertising the White Tiger radio station at Scott University. Zed realized that must be their next target. The trio rushed to the station's headquarters. On the way, the radio broadcast was interrupted by gunfire, prompting John to hurry up. Arriving at the building, they split up. Because there was only one MP3 player, Chaz and Zed stayed back to cut the power while John, wearing headphones, ran toward the broadcast room. By the time John reached the room, the record was already playing, and the staff were clearly under its influence. Downstairs, Chaz struggled to break into the transmitter control room, yelling at Zed to stand back. Upstairs, the broadcast continued with no visible injuries yet. Chaz drove his car straight into the control room, destroying the transmitter and cutting the broadcast. Upstairs, the music stopped broadcasting, but the record continued to play locally. John's headphones were ripped off by a frenzied staff member, leaving him exposed to the demon's whispers. Overwhelmed, he struggled against the mental assault. Papa Midnight entered the room wearing earplugs and quickly destroyed the speakers with 2 shots, ending the music. People began to regain their senses and fled the office. Papa Midnight moved to grab the record, but John blocked him, declaring he wouldn't get it. Opening the door, a possessed individual tried to fight back, but John began chanting a spell. The door shut on its own, and black mist filled the room. Papa Midnight demanded to know what he was doing. Finishing the spell, John replied he summoned the demon trapped in the record to send it back where it belongs. Inside, the demon ripped apart the 2 men under its control. When Papa Midnight opened the door, the floor had cracked open, swallowing everything into the abyss. Papa Midnight stood there and cursed John non-stop. At the singer's house, John captured the soul broker and forced him to swallow the contract. This was the only way to break the agreement, but everything granted by the demon would be taken back, including the soul broker himself. Meanwhile, Papa Midnight was seen burning a voodoo doll made in John's likeness, clearly still bitter. It was obvious their conflict wasn't over, and the sparks between them were bound to ignite further chaos. The scene shifts to an airport customs checkpoint where a disheveled man was under inspection. His appearance alone was enough to raise suspicion, and soon enough he was escorted into an interrogation room. The officer asked him about the bottle he was carrying, but the man hesitated, refusing to explain. The officer suspected him of smuggling or concealing drugs and pulled up the man's sleeve, revealing numerous needle marks. Instead of offering an explanation, the man simply warned him not to touch the bottle. Naturally, the officer ignored the warning. The moment he grabbed the bottle, his hands were pierced by a sharp pain, causing him to drop it. The bottle shattered, and a swarm of insects emerged, quickly spreading their wings and taking flight. As the officer stood in shock, the insects crawled into his mouth and all the way to his butt. Elsewhere, in a park, John complimented Zed, saying her clairvoyance had improved a lot. Zed responded proudly, saying ever since she started working with him, her skills had improved in leaps and bounds. As they talked, Zed suddenly saw a vision of coins raining from the sky. John looked puzzled, and everything around them seemed to freeze. Sure enough, it was Manny, the angel, making his entrance. The two started talking, and the conversation quickly turned to Zed, the enigmatic woman. Manny explained when an angel descended, people perceived them differently. Her vision of coins suggests she's rather conservative. It also shows she's special, but even with her uniqueness, she still has free will in extraordinary situations. John, however, shifted the topic and asked his purpose here. Manny instead remarked he had been out of sight since their last meeting. Suddenly, everything returned to normal. Zed felt something had happened, but John wasn't about to explain. A little later, the two returned to the spirit sanctuary while Chaz was off repairing the cab. It was Zed's training time, and the pair planned to enter and get started. Just as they approached the door, John stopped abruptly and pulled her back, saying someone had broken in. Zed asked how he could be so sure. John explained Liv's father had safeguards in place. Honestly, he almost felt bad for the intruder. Inside, the first thing they noticed were signs of carpet beetles. That in itself wasn't too concerning. However, the electrical system started fluctuating, and the two became more alert. Suddenly, a voice called out to John. John recognized it's his old friend, Gary. The man explained he knocked, but nobody answered. Relieved that it wasn't a serious threat, Zed busied herself spraying insecticide. Setting Gary aside, John asked why he was there. The two chatted briefly. It turned out Gary had disappeared without explanation. When John pressed him about it, Gary simply muttered that it was because of Astra. Hearing this, John fell silent, saying nothing more. Zed, intrigued, asked who's Astra, but neither man answered. Instead, John changed the subject, asking Gary why he had returned and what was with all the bugs. Gary sighed and began explaining it all started when he was drinking. He was so drunk, he didn't even realize he'd wandered into the streets of Sudan. That's when he saw this guy. His body and face were covered in binding sigils. He could tell right away that someone had sealed a demon inside him. To make up for the mistakes he made in Newcastle, he brought the man to his room and resealed the demon into a bottle. Zed immediately asked where the bottle was now. At the airport, the customs officer who had been infested by the demonic insects began eating everything in sight. No one dared to approach him as he devoured even the fries still sizzling in the fryer. Once he'd had his fill, he collapsed, and a swarm of horrifying insects poured out of his mouth, their numbers overwhelming. Back at the sanctuary, John worked on carving a new containment bottle to seal the insects. Zed walked over to chat, and the conversation turned to Gary. John explained that Gary had once been a spoiled rich kid, which led to his addiction, though not the kind that could kill. After the Newcastle incident, he spiraled out of control, becoming the man he is now. Curious, Zed asked about the Newcastle incident. John brushed her off, unwilling to delve into his unresolved guilt about Astra. Finishing the bottle, he enchanted it with magic and declared it ready. He said they just needed to find the demon now. Later, they watched a news report about a virus outbreak in Atlanta. So far, the transmission source was known to be insects, but there was no evidence of human-to-human spread. Watching the report, Gary was overwhelmed with guilt. John turned off the TV and explained the compulsive eating could be caused by a hunger demon. They're not the brightest, they just eat and reproduce. John told Gary he was going to stop the hunger demon. Gary insisted on tagging along, saying he bore some responsibility, but John rejected him outright. Zed, feeling John was being too harsh, tried to intervene but failed to change his mind. After John left, Zed asked Gary about the Newcastle incident. This time, Gary didn't hold back. He explained that everyone had once followed John, not just for his magic, but because of his reputation and charisma. Their trip to England had felt like a must. As he recounted Astra's story, Zed moved closer to comfort him using her muscles, but the moment she touched his hand, she was struck by a powerful, clairvoyant vision. The chaotic surge of emotions left her overwhelmed, and she collapsed from the sheer impact. Meanwhile, John infiltrated a supermarket where the outbreak had started. Inside, he noticed a mother and son acting nervously, which caught his attention. After questioning them, he learned that insects had emerged from the body of a meat delivery driver. Following the lead, John arrived at the meat warehouse and began searching for the insects. It didn't take long for him to find the deceased driver. As John investigated further, he saw insects crawling out of the body. He called out if anyone was alive here. Just then, he saw someone crouched on the floor, gorging themselves on raw meat. Hearing John's voice, the figure turned briefly before resuming their feast. John pulled out the enchanted bottle and began casting a spell. The incantation caused the host to react violently, crawling backward toward John. Despite John's growing frustration, the spell wasn't working. He intensified his efforts until the insects burst from the host's body and were sucked into the bottle. Just as he started to feel triumphant, the bottle cracked under the strain and shattered. Left with no other option, John shielded himself with a slab of pork, barely managing to escape the warehouse unharmed. Back at the sanctuary, John questioned how Gary had managed to seal the insects in the first place. Zed approached and asked if he was okay, but John turned the question back on her, sensing something was off. She brushed it off, saying she was fine. Gary, trying to be helpful, asked about the situation. John explained this hunger demon was far stronger than anything he had dealt with before. Darkness was definitely on the rise. Zed then presented a drawing she'd made during a clairvoyant episode, suggesting it might help. Looking at the drawing, John suspected something had happened between the two. Zed quickly clarified that they touched, but not in the way he was thinking. John warned them to avoid physical contact going forward and took the drawing to consult with a shaman. Soon after, John found a trusted contact, and the two discussed the issue. After examining the drawing, the shaman admitted there wasn't a direct solution, but suggested they embark on a journey that might provide answers. Inside the inner room, the shaman explained he would guide him into a vision to trace the source of the hunger demon. This substance is called mist. Once consumed, it creates a permanent effect. John hesitated since that sounds terrifying. The shaman reassured him that he had prepared an antidote. With that, the two began consuming the mist. John grimaced at the taste, muttering this stuff was awful. If they were both under its effects, how could they take the antidote? His question went unanswered as the effects of the mist began to take hold, and the vision started. In the vision, the shaman removed John's eye and swapped it with his own to guide him through past events. In Sudan, starvation was rampant, and the souls of the starved often transformed into hunger demons. These demons knew only how to consume, killing one person after another. Eventually, a psychic intervened, using his magic to summon and seal a hunger demon inside the body of a homeless man. The ritual was brutal, but it was deemed necessary to protect the many. The sealed demon was incapable of leaving its host, only devouring it and then turning on other demons until complete annihilation. However, due to Gary's interference, the demon was resealed before its destruction, allowing it to escape. The shaman fed John the antidote, snapping him out of the vision. Both realized the only way to defeat this mutated hunger demon was to replicate the original ritual. At the sanctuary, Gary grew restless, overwhelmed by guilt, and convinced the situation was his fault. He argued with himself, wondering why he couldn't contain the demon again when he had done it once before. Zed tried to stop him, insisting John would handle it, but Gary grabbed her arm. The contact triggered another overwhelming surge of clairvoyant energy, leaving Zed weakened and collapsing to the floor. Gary used the opportunity to flee rather than have a baby with her. Later, when John returned, he called out but received no response. Spotting Zed slumped on the sofa, he jokingly said he had told them too to keep their distance. Realizing what had happened, he instantly pieced together the situation and cursed Gary aloud. Zed explained that Gary was trying to fix his mistake, but John was adamant that Gary couldn't possibly handle the stronger demon this time. John eventually found Gary being roughed up by two thugs. Approaching with a sly remark, he offered to help. Producing a vial of mist, he promised it would take them to Cloud 9, distracting them long enough to rescue Gary. Later at a bar, the two shared drinks and talked. Gary opened up about Astra, recounting how he had been high on drugs during the exorcism, clouding his judgment. A mistake in the ritual had caused the Babylonian demon to break free. There had been a chance to salvage the situation, but Gary, paralyzed by fear, had hidden instead. When he sobered up, the crushing guilt pushed him deeper into his addiction. John listened without judgment, admitting the responsibility was his since he brought Gary into this world and underestimated the situation. Ultimately, Astra was dragged into hell because of him. Their conversation was interrupted by breaking news on TV. A virus outbreak had hit Atlanta's Grand Theater. Police had already cordoned off the area. John stood, raising his glass to propose they were going to seal that thing together for real this time. Their next stop was a museum, where John planned to steal an African shaman's dagger needed to complete the ritual. As they discussed their plan, John smashed a display case, and time suddenly froze. Manny appeared, asking if he was sure he wanted to go through with this. After a moment's thought, John replied that he could do this. Sensing John's determination, Manny unfroze time and Gary retrieved the dagger. A security guard approached, warning John to stay put. Meanwhile, Gary quickly found the dagger, pried open the display case, and grabbed it. Back with John, the guard proved no match for his magic and was soon compelled to dance uncontrollably. Gary returned with the dagger, and John, satisfied, said he was reliable when it counted. Together, they left the museum. They arrived at the Grand Theater where the area had been evacuated due to the quarantine. Inside, a possessed victim was sitting in the middle of the theater, gorging on popcorn. John turned to Gary, saying time was short and they should act quickly to seal this thing. The two stepped onto the stage, and Gary asked what the plan was. John replied he learned from the shaman that this mutated hunger demon is unlike any they had encountered before. No cage, jar, or container can hold it, only a human's living body. Hearing this, Gary realized why John had stolen the dagger and brought him here. Yet he neither hesitated nor blamed John. He accepted that it was his mistake, and it was ultimately his responsibility to make things right. John added this would cause him unimaginable pain for days, and in the end, he and the hunger demon would perish together. John hesitated, clearly torn, but what choice did he have? He couldn't simply drag a random person off the street. Such an act would only perpetuate the cycle of karma. Gary understood and made his decision. He removed his shirt and knelt at the center of the stage while John stood behind him, chanting and performing the ritual to summon the hunger demon. Soon, the insects began pouring out of the parasite's body. John double-checked with Gary for confirmation and, once assured, resumed his incantation. The swarm of hunger flies flew into Gary's body, vanishing entirely within him. John rushed to comfort Gary and then pulled out the dagger to begin carving sealing sigils onto Gary's skin. Gary cried out in agony, perhaps from the hunger demon's torment or the pain of the carving. At dawn, John brought Gary back to the sanctuary. Hearing the commotion, Zed came out only to see Gary's condition. Shocked, she wondered if the hunger demon was inside him. Zed accused John of treating his friend so cruelly. John, however, was just as reluctant, saying everyone bore the consequences of their actions. He told Zed if she couldn't stomach this, then maybe it's time for her to leave. Zed paused, thought it over, and then asked what's next. Not long after, Gary was restrained in a room, writhing and screaming in torment. John sat beside him, silent and unwavering. At that moment, Manny, the angel symbolizing hope and grace, appeared. John looked at him, his eyes filled with helplessness. Manny knelt down beside Gary and began to pray for him. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.